Imagine this for a second. A sovereign nation, literally fighting for its survival, having to ask a private commercial company for permission to fight its war. Now, they're not asking for weapons. They're not even asking for money. They are asking a corporation for permission to conduct a military strike. I mean, it sounds like something straight out of a futuristic geopolitical thriller, right? But according to recent reports, it is the exact reality we are facing right now. Welcome to this explainer, where today we are diving deep into the incredible situation unfolding over the skies of Ukraine. It's a situation where a corporate terms of service agreement might actually hold more power than traditional treaties or parliaments.
So let's set the scene. It's July 28th, 2026, a closed-door meeting at the White House. According to reporting published by The Atlantic, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made an extraordinary, frankly unprecedented request to President Trump. Kyiv wanted to use Starlink, which, as you know, is the massive satellite internet constellation owned by Elon Musk's SpaceX, over Russian territory. Now, Reuters reported that President Trump said he would consider the request and raise it with Musk, though he didn't offer any specific timeline. Meanwhile, another source told The Atlantic that Musk actually declined a meeting with Zelensky altogether. And this leads us directly to the absolute heart of the issue, the geofence. What is that? Well, it's a corporate-mandated digital boundary that restricts service. SpaceX's stated policy restricts Starlink service inside Russia's internationally recognized borders. So Ukrainian forces can use the signal across Ukraine, and that includes Russian-occupied areas. But the very moment you cross that old established line on the map, the signal just vanishes. What we have here is a literal line on a map that dictates life and death. It determines exactly where one side can and cannot effectively strike its enemy. And the craziest part, it wasn't drawn by a four-star general or a government treaty. It was drawn by a corporate terms of service decision.
Okay, let's break down exactly what Kyiv is asking for here. First off, they want SpaceX to lift those Starlink restrictions inside Russia. Why? It's all about enabling deep penetration drone strikes on mobile ballistic missile launchers. And the timeline for this is absolutely critical. They've made it clear they need this capability before winter sets in. Now, before we get completely swept up in the geopolitical drama of it all, we really need to apply some strict investigative discipline. We have to separate confirmed reality from unverified reporting. So, looking at the confirmed facts, as of early August 2026, the geofence absolutely still stands. Furthermore, on August 4th, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies published an analysis arguing that Washington should quickly heed Ukraine's request, specifically citing depleted American Patriot interceptor stocks. That is a confirmed stated argument. On the flip side, though, we have the reported details. The Zelensky-Trump meeting, the specific asks, Musk declining the meeting, these are based on unnamed sources speaking to The Atlantic. There has been no official announcement, no policy change, and no public agreement from SpaceX. We aren't covering a final decision today. We are just looking at the extraordinary nature of the request itself. To truly grasp why Ukraine is making this urgent request, you have to understand the tactical reality on the ground right now. The Russian missile launchers that Ukraine desperately wants to hit are highly mobile. It's a rapid sequence. Step 1, they drive into position. Step 2, they fire a ballistic missile. Step 3, they displace and hide. This entire shoot and scoot cycle isn't measured in hours, it's measured in minutes. If you want to neutralize one of these launchers, you literally have to find it and strike it inside that tiny, rapidly vanishing time window. 500 kilometers. Think about that distance for a second. That is the depth of the kill zone Ukraine desperately needs to open inside Russia, at least according to reporting by United 24 Media. Because without a live, real-time operator link, a long-range drone is basically flying blind once it passes the border. Starlink is precisely the technology that makes that live link cheap, portable, and incredibly hard to sever. And there is a very stark, unavoidable reason why Starlink is the only immediate option. Over 10,800 satellites. As of late July 2026, tracking data showed roughly 10,800 Starlink satellites in orbit. To put that into perspective, that is roughly 69% of all active spacecraft circling our planet. And regulators just authorized thousands more back in January of 2026. Literally no government on Earth has ever assembled a communication network of this scale. It completely redefines the question of commercial space and warfare. It's really no longer a question of if commercial space matters, but rather who gets to decide what it does. And it's worth noting, the operational boundaries of Starlink have been fiercely contested throughout this entire conflict. Look at September 2022 in Sevastopol. It was initially reported that Musk ordered a shutoff to disrupt a Ukrainian naval drone attack. However, Musk fiercely disputed this, stating that coverage over Crimea had never been active in the first place. He said he simply denied an emergency request to turn it on, arguing it would make SpaceX complicit in a major act of war. The original reporter, Walter Isaacson, actually later corrected his account to match Musk's version. Then, in Kherson in 2022, Reuters reported over 100 terminals were deactivated. SpaceX called that report completely inaccurate. And just recently, in May 2026 in Starobilsk, Russian sources alleged Starlink mini-terminals guided drone strikes, but that's an allegation Reuters could not independently verify. Reported. Disputed. Alleged. It is absolutely crucial we keep those distinctions clear.
Throughout all of this intense back and forth, SpaceX has maintained a highly consistent public defense. As Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX, stated very plainly back in February 2023, the system was never meant to be weaponized. Their argument is straightforward. They are providing a commercial connectivity product, not selling a military targeting system.
But here is the massive structural paradox sitting at the core of this conflict. Look at who is actually paying for this dependency. Ukraine doesn't own it, and they don't even pay for most of it. Poland has supplied and funded subscriptions for over 29,000 of the roughly 50,000 terminals operating in Ukraine. And that was a funding line that barely survived a public veto fight by Polish President Karol Nawrocki in 2025. Then you have the United States. The Pentagon has a reported $23 million a year contract for Starlink service in Ukraine, plus access to their encrypted government variant, Starshield. So you've got a Polish budget line, an American defense contract, and Ukrainian operators literally risking their lives in the trenches. That's 3 governments with money and blood in the system, yet not one of them holds the operational switch.
Which forces us into what might be the core philosophical dilemma of our time when it comes to modern warfare. We have 2 very serious, equally weighty readings of this exact same switch. On one side, you have the argument of the accountability gap. On the other, the argument of legitimate restraint. Our goal here isn't to take a side or choose between them, but to understand both perspectives perfectly.
First, let's break down the accountability gap. This perspective argues that deciding where a state can or cannot strike during a war is the ultimate sovereign act. Decisions like that should belong to institutions that can be sued, questioned by the public, voted out of office, or at least bound by international law. A private firm? They face literally 0 of those pressures. Their policy can change on a random Tuesday with no public reasoning and no avenue for appeal. And international law simply hasn't caught up to this reality. As pointed out in a January 2026 military.com analysis, the 1967 Outer Space Treaty completely fails to address the denial of satellite services in wartime. But against that, we have to impartially weigh the powerful argument for legitimate restraint. This view holds that a private company is absolutely entitled to set the terms for its own commercial product. Again, they sold internet connectivity, not a weapons targeting system. More importantly, Musk's stated reasoning has consistently been to avoid direct escalation between the US and Russia to nuclear superpowers. Proponents of this view argue that if his judgment was right, this wasn't some kind of corporate overreach at all. It was a necessary brake on nuclear escalation that no government was willing to pull themselves.
So you might be wondering, why doesn't Ukraine just use something else? Well, the timeline reveals a pretty stark truth. Today, right now, there is utter dependence on commercial space. Alternatives are coming, sure. Take the European Union's IRIS-2 multi-orbit constellation being built by the Space Rise Consortium. But initial services for that aren't expected until around 2028, with full operation not happening until 2030.
Yes, there are technically other options on the board right now. Eutelsat OneWeb has roughly 650 low-orbit satellites. The EU has GOVSATCOM to pool government capacity. And the US has Starshield, where the control arguably sits inside the Defense Department. But here is the brutal logistical reality. Every single one of those options is real, but absolutely none of them can instantly replace 50,000 active terminals currently sitting in the freezing trenches of Ukraine this winter. It just can't happen overnight.
And this brings us to the chilling new precedent of privatized warfare. The lesson echoing far beyond Ukraine's borders is this. Dependence on commercial space is an irreversible decision. You make this choice years in advance, usually tucked away in dry procurement documents that hardly anyone ever reads. And then, when the shooting actually starts, you are forced to live inside those corporate terms of service. You are betting your entire national security that the company will still be there and still be willing to help on your absolute worst day.
As international borders begin to fade and the boundaries of geopolitical conflict are increasingly drawn by digital configuration settings rather than international treaties, it leaves us with this. When a private company can set the limits of a war requiring no votes and answering to no legislature, who is actually in command?